Hello there. This is Lauren Schoenberg talking to you in March 2020, getting ready to share an interview from 1984 that I had the great honor of doing with Milt Jackson and Ray Brown. They were in town to do a gig downtown, and also were doing an appearance in Harlem, and they came by WKCR to talk about it. The reason that Milt Jackson was there first and Ray Brown came in later was that he was trying to park the car, which is still hard to do in that part of Manhattan near Columbia. Right before the interview began, I remember asking Milt Jackson, whether I could call him Mr. Jackson, which is what I called him naturally. And he said, no, call me Milt. And I did. And there's a certain kind of informality that, on the one hand, almost seems inappropriate in a way for a guy in his early 20s to be talking to musicians of that stature. But that was the genre of that kind of interview at that time. Nonetheless, you'll get to hear these two masters talking at length about their early days. I treasured it then, I treasure it now, and I'm so happy to be able to share it.
It's not the first time, but I'd like to welcome you back anyway to WKCR. Milt.
Nice to be here.
Thanks so much for making the effort to come up. We know you're busy down at the Blue Note. I believe you opened last night.
Right.
And down there with Mickey Roker, Ray Brown, and is Cedar Walton with you?
Yes, he is.
Yeah, what a band, all-star quartet at the Blue Note. I think you'll be there through Saturday.
Through Sunday.
Through Sunday.
Sure.
All right, so everybody should have plenty of an opportunity to get down to 131 West 3rd Street and check out the great Milt Jackson, Ray Brown band. We were listening at the beginning of that set to Lester Leaps In from Jazz at the Philharmonic at Carnegie Hall, with Ray Brown is on that record, and that's why we had spun it, and we got to hear a little bit of Lester Young's solo, and we faded that down and went to Milt's new record on the Pablo label called Soul Root, with Gene Harris on piano, in addition to Mickey Roker and Ray Brown. And Milt, when we were sitting here in the studio listening to Lester Young, I thought you had some beautiful things to say about Prez, and I was wondering maybe you could just tell me again what you were telling me while we were listening to that.
On occasion when I do workshops and seminars, he's one of my prime examples about certain things in terms of sound and playing notes, and as far as improvising, jazz music. He is fantastic at just taking just one note and getting the most from it in terms of sound and feeling. Yeah. First of all, I think those to me are the most important ingredients in playing jazz music, the kind of music we come from. And if you don't get a sound, first of all, then you don't have to really be that concerned about the feeling, because the feeling won't mean nothing if you don't have a sound.
That's right.
So to me, that comes first.
Yeah.
And I remember, as a kid, when I went to hear the basic band in the real early days, I'm talking about 30s, when they first hit 38,
right.
39, back then.
Yeah.
Tell you how old I am, folks. But to go and hear those guys play those solos, Lester, Herschel Evans, whom a lot of people don't know because he died many years ago. Yeah. And to hear those solos, but Lester Young, man, it was just so marvelous at playing one note and getting the best feeling from it.
And that great time feeling he had, too. Not too many people.
He started out as a drummer, from what I understand, originally, yes.
I think his brother was a drummer. I think Lee Young.
Something like, yeah, his brother's a drummer, right.
Yeah. That's the voice of Milt Jackson. Again, we want to tell you Milt Jackson has made it up to WKCR on the Musician's Show. It's 13 minutes after 8 o'clock, and we're doing something special here at the radio station in a couple of weeks. We're producing a special that I believe they're calling Harlem Week, and we've had a lot of musicians up here. I believe Big Nick Nicholas was up yesterday doing an interview about his days. I think it was the Celebrity Club that Big Nick was at. I'm not sure.
No, the Paradise.
The Paradise, right, where he used to run all those sessions, and we're getting a lot of background. And I know, Milt, I believe you're from Detroit, and Dizzy Gillespie heard you out there.
Yeah, right.
In the World War II days, if I'm not mistaken. Then you joined that all-star band.
Yeah, this was 1945.
1945. hard to believe looking at you. You don't look like you could be that old.
Oh, gee, thanks.
You're welcome. But of course, you were in that great band that went out to Billy Berg's with Ray Brown and Charlie Parker. Stan Levy, and Al Haig.
Al Haig, and then he hired Lucky Thompson, who was already on the coast at the time.
Yeah.
Along with Howard McGee.
Yeah, that was such a piece of jazz history. And
yes, it was. And you see, the club owner, in order to fulfill the contract, Dizzy hired Lucky because he wasn't sure about Bird. The Bird might not show up at night, that kind of thing. And he had Lucky there to cover for the band,
Yeah.
But, man, you're talking about an incredible experience musically every single night.
Yeah.
Just listening to Charlie Parker, I turned my back on the audience, because I had, not out of disrespect,
Sure,
man, but I was just so in awe of Bird, man. I just had to see and hear what he was doing,
Yeah, being on the same bandstand with that must have been something.
Because it was just absolutely fantastic to hear the things he played, because,
Yeah.
it's hard. Because, everything may not catch the ear of the layman listener right away, but you go back and you hear it again, and each time you hear something different, man. It's astounding.
Yeah. I can imagine that must have been quite an inspiration at such an early age, being thrust into that all of a sudden.
Oh, man, listen, we'd go home after the gig, Ray and I, we'd practice all day, man. We'd practice all day, 16, 17 hours, until it was time to go to work that next night.
Yeah.
Because we're just full of ideas musically. And this is the way that you get your ideas out. You practice on them.
Yeah. Well, such a amazing number of topics, Milt, I'd like to talk with you about, and I realize we have maybe half an hour, 45 minutes tonight, but I'd like to invite you back right now some other time and spend 3 hours and get into some detail, because I've got a lot of recordings I'd like you to hear. But this evening, I'm wondering if we could talk a bit about Harlem and when you first came to New York and what the scene was like as a community and as a musical center at that time, and what the feeling was like up there in the 40s.
Oh, boy, can I ever tell you. It was really most fascinating, because Dizzy lived there. Well, all the musicians, all the greats lived uptown, anyway. And when I first came to New York, I stayed at Dizzy's house on 7th Avenue for 3 weeks. And this is when he'd already hired Ray, okay? And that's when I met Ray, and we both went to Washington, which, by the way, was the very first gig, Washington, D.C.
Yeah?
Along with Dizzy, myself, Ray, Max Roach, and Charlie Rouse.
Really?
That was the very first gig, okay? And when we got back to New York after that engagement, then he got Bird, and we went right out to California.
Yeah. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit now. I guess you came to New York a little bit after those legendary days at Minton's and Monroe's, or
no. After, man, you got to be kidding. I first came to New York on a weekend pass out of the service. I was down in Camp Patrick, Virginia, for a weekend. Okay, man, that was the most fascinating weekend I've ever seen in New York. And it was my first visit to New York, So I immediately went back to Detroit. I got out the service and I stayed for a few months and organized a little group around there. And after we worked for a few months around there, I got this offer from Dizzy. And I just packed up and left Detroit. And this is in 1945, okay? Now, I came to the clubs, man, and you had people like Art Tatum, where it was known as holding class after work up at the Hollywood Bar up on 7th Avenue, 134th Street. And all the musicians that I had ever heard about, man, they were working someplace around New York, or if not on the road with the band, Then the Savoy Ballroom. Man, you just thought, I missed that? Oh, man, you got to be kidding. And the Playhouse, Monday night, it was like the thing today. I can only compare it in terms of the charisma or the enthusiasm, not the audience, because it's a much bigger audience. Like the people what they're doing, trying to get Michael Jackson tickets, for example, right? Okay, well, we had Monday night sessions when it was known that Bird and Dizzy were going to jam that night. You had to fight to get yourself a seat on Monday night. you know. And if you got up, the ladies, it didn't apply so much to the ladies, but the men. You got up to go to the bathroom, you lost your seat. You come back to get that seat back, you had to fight some guy because he moved in it and he's not about to move.
Yeah.
Oh no, man, that's one of the most beautiful experiences that you know, and all right uptown. Small's Paradise.
Yeah.
Oh man, every club, the Elks Rendezvous, Bowman's, all those places. And what happens is, man, you had live music. Okay, number one. Number two, all of those musicians were still most of the innovators that you've heard through the years.
How was it that you wound up to be on that great session Coleman Hawkins made with You Go to My Head and Cocktails for Two? Do you remember that record? Those records with Hawk?
Yeah.
In 1946 with Hank Jones and Max Roach and were you working with Hawk at that time, or was it just a record?
No, I had never worked with B&X on the gig except for jam sessions, you know. But the company, they asked me would I like to record with Coleman Hawkins, you know.
Sure.
And you know what I said, you know, what time do we start?
Right.
Sure. Because, see, I missed the chance also to record with Duke. You know, there was not one opportunity that I had. But in the course of bookings, he had to leave and go someplace, and we never got to reschedule. Which is also why I just want to mention the fact that I did not pass up the chance to record the one with Basie. Okay? That's also unique. I don't know if you know this. I was the first guest instrumentalist that recorded with the band.
That's right.
You know, but before I was only a vocalist.
That's right.
You know,
those are great records. There's
so, you know, I have a very proud feeling about that.
Yeah. Along the same lines, in case you're interested, I don't know if you know, Milt, but somebody put a record out, and I don't know how you feel about these records when they put out broadcasts and all that kind of stuff, but someone found something of the MJQ with Lester Young and Miles Davis when you guys were in tour in 1957.
Okay, that would have to be in Europe, when we were with the Birdland All-Stars.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, that's some great stuff to hear you all together.
Because that's when we toured together. And I'm sure they recorded every note someplace, man, because they all had recorders in and the little recorders. And somebody eventually will try and produce this, man, because, you know, you got all of the new electronic equipment now where you can take out noises and that kind of thing and produce a fairly good record from those days. Yeah. So this is what's always being done somewhere.
Yeah. You were naming some places before when we were talking about those early days when you first came to town in the 1940s up in Harlem, and I'm wondering if you could elaborate about the particular atmosphere and some of the things that were going on and some of your favorite places to hang out, and maybe some places that we don't know about because people don't talk about them anymore, besides Minton and Monroe's, which people talk about. But what were some of the other musicians' hangouts?
Well, the Savoy, like I said, the Elks Rendezvous.
Elks Rendezvous.
You know, that was one.
Where was that?
133rd and Lenox Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it was also very popular. You know, it had bands and groups coming in all the time. Small's Paradise was also very, very popular.
Mm-hmm.
135th and 7th Avenue.
I've heard stories about late night sessions and gigs that started when the other bands got off and practiced dances.
That was at Monroe's.
Could you tell us what that was about?
Monroe's Uptown House. Yes, I can tell you about that.
Please.
That's how I earned my 802 card. I couldn't work enough gigs. You know, you could only work one gig at a time. You know, there were stipulations, of course, and make a steady gig. And the way I made enough money to finally get my 802 card was working in Clark Monroe after our joint uptown, 134th Street, right just off 7th Avenue.
Hope it doesn't sound naive to you, Milt, but for someone that wasn't there, what was an after-hours joint? I mean, what was
the regular licensed nightclubs closed at 4 o'clock in the morning. Okay? The after-hour club is the club that opens after the regular clubs close. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it was.
I see.
And it also had live music, just like the regular nightclub, though, you see. And the guys would come down and jam all morning.
As you mentioned, all the musicians you heard about were in New York, you know, all the giants, Tatum and Coleman Hawkins and Duke Ellington. And what was it like in Harlem in those days? How were the musicians regarded as members of the community? Whereas now, it would be hard to get arrested if you're walking down the street in Harlem. I don't think don't know how many people would recognize musicians now, the jazz musicians, but back in those days, were the musicians kind of special people in the community, and were they treated with respect?
We all lived together as a whatever section. There was always a great musician in that section of the town, from 110th Street all the way up to 155th Street and beyond. This was like the radius, I guess you say, of most of the musicians that I had met. And whatever neighborhood, always one of the musicians that was well known, and well liked. Oh, and something else, man. I don't know how could I possibly sit here and leave out the Apollo.
Of course, which is not too far from where we are right now.
That is where all of the bands and a lot of people got started, as you know, through the amateur hour and all. And that's also very, very legendary. They've tried to revive it here recently too, man. And it's just, to me, personally, it's just a shame, man, that they can't. When I say a shame, man, I mean people like the government with real funds appropriated to keep something like that alive. Because really, man, that's all it takes.
That's right.
The symphonies. Let's take the major symphonies in the country, which America idolizes, and I'm not against it either, but it was always taken care of. In other words, through subscriptions. They had members. They subscribed to it whether they went or not. And man, something I discovered, half of them didn't go. Now, in playing with symphonies a lot, because of the type of music, what the MJQ plays, right? You know what it means. We play many concerts with symphonies and string quartets and classical musicians as well. Those people in the audience would go to sleep before we came on, because usually the symphony played the first half, and then the second half of the program, we would come out. Okay. And those people would fall asleep during that first half of the program.
Yeah. I remember very special, one of the first concerts I went to was the MJQ with the Juilliard String Quartet, and I'll never forget that. You did that piece with the tempo, where it went slower and faster with nobody conducting it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was amazing. That was amazing. Milt Jackson, our guest on the Musician Show here, 26 minutes after 8 o'clock. You're talking about the different areas of Harlem where there was always a musician. Maybe you could tell us about some of the different neighborhoods that were within Harlem in those days, and some of the musicians that you associated with those parts, like Monk was from the San Juan Hill area or something.
Well, it was sort of, different though. Monk was raised down around 63rd Street.
Right.
And it weren't an overabundance, I would say, of blacks in that neighborhood in those years. This is why I say the majority of the musicians, Dizzy, they're right in the middle of Harlem, because this is where it was.
Yeah. When did you first play the Apollo Theater? I also meant to ask.
I first played the Apollo with Dizzy, Dizzy's Big Band, 1946.
How did the Apollo audiences react to Dizzy's music? Did they love it?
Oh yes, they loved it. Yes, indeed. And what was good, it was the Apollo, the audience, in other words, is really like a training ground. In other words, you got over. If you weren't good, they knew, and they let you know. In other words, you get plenty booze, and
Wasn't there a guy named Puerto Rico?
Right.
Who used to swing
that
down?
was amateur night.
That was
okay?
amateur night.
If you're not getting over and the crowd starts booing, he comes out with came out with a little hula type skirt and a pistol with blanks and shot you right off the stage.
Yeah. Cruel,
Sure,
but
right.
it probably helped a lot of
Right.
people.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Seems to me then Dizzy's band Jazz, it was part of the entertainment industry more than it is now. In other words, you're playing at the Apollo Theater as part of an entertainment package with Dusty Fletcher or with whatever comedians were on the bill at that time, whereas now Jazz has been separated.
Fine, but funny, man, as great as those productions were, and you're talking about entertainment. Show you where, man, I think it's been sabotaged. Those same shows we're talking about now at the Apollo with all the entertainment. Now there's a variety of entertainment to please any audience now, okay?
Right.
Because it's a whole complete variety. There's a singer, there's even dancers, even a tap dancers, okay? Plus even a chorus if necessary, and then the band, okay? Now they tell us, man, well, we can't use jazz on television because, jazz is too sophisticated. It's too cool to sit and watch. Well, see, they didn't realize jazz music is serious. You don't have time to do too much clowning and acting crazy while you're playing that music.
Right.
And this is a way for them to ease it around hiring blacks for television productions and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, one thing was the fact that some of the earlier giants of jazz, like Duke or Louis Armstrong or whoever, Fats Waller or even Dizzy, have incorporated showmanship into their presentation. Of course, when it comes to the music, it's 101% music, and that's it. But they were able to incorporate showmanship into their act so that people could relate to them, I guess. Harlem changed over the years. Of course, the Harlem now in 1984 is certainly a different one from the one you first saw during World War II. And I'm wondering, Milt Jackson, if you have any ideas on what made that change and what the different things were that led to that change.
It's really hard to really just pinpoint that. But, life goes on in all facets.
It's a big question, I know.
And time moves, okay? Nothing stands still. Okay, the days I'm talking about, okay, as far as a black, it was days of poverty, man, where you really struggle, okay? So one of the first things you do in terms of trying to alleviate the struggle is when you make enough money, you leave the neighborhood and go to a better one, okay? This is eventually what happened. All right, all of the money that had been invested into the nightclubs and whatnot, we, as blacks per se, still didn't own them. Most of those were just, we just fronted, as we say. Mm-hmm. Used the name, but we are not the ones that really made the money, you see? Okay, I say that to say, none of the money, this applied to 52nd Street, by the way, also, which was also a very fascinating thing. If I have a minute or two left, I want to tell you about it.
We got time.
Now, none of the money is reinvested in that. So all the revenue that's going in, when it comes out, is not being put back. So there's no kind of turnover, right? None. Same thing, 52nd Street, man. I watched them just methodically destroy it because as fast as they made the money, they took it elsewhere. Okay, so we got no backing. Now, okay, look at today's thing. Michael Jackson has achieved something that no other black has ever done, okay? So, okay, as a black, you got to be proud of that, because he's worked hard, and he's done that for a long time. Don't forget that he's still a youngster to me. He's done that, though, since he was like 5 years old,
Sure.
That's good. Okay, but now stop and think about it. If we had any part of that type of promotion when our music was good, when all of those great jazz creators and innovators were living, man, your kids would walk to school in the morning singing Charlie Parker solos, yours and mine. Mm-hmm. Not just that simple. Another thing, this music lends to intelligence as far as the mind goes, okay? All right, if this music brings your mind and your head together and all of that, and your heart through the music, then it's a threat to the government because now they can't really control you. They got to really be able to control you. Now, let me tell you about the rock music and all. It's fine, and I don't, you can't knock it, that's progress. But this would still be today's music. A lot of innovators would still be alive, and it would be very much in the eyes of the whole entire world. Okay?
Mm-hmm. That's Milt Jackson with some very deep ideas. Thanks for sharing them with us. And as I mentioned before, I'd like to offer an invitation to have you up here again, spend 3 hours so we can get into some more depth. You mentioned 52nd Street. Did you work on 52nd Street with Dizzy?
Oh, yes, indeed. Yeah. Now, the first time I went to jam with Charlie Parker, because Dizzy had come back to New York, by the way, and told Bird about me, which I'll never forget, of course.
Yeah.
All right? And when I went, he said, man, you got to hear this cat play. Let him play when he comes to sit in, because I've never heard no vibes like this, all right? It was a black man also. Mm-hmm. That was the manager of the club. This was the only club owned by a black in New York, by the way, mm-hmm. Okay? He put me out. Okay, said, no, man, you got no jam. I said, well, and Bird argued with him for, 15 minutes. He argued with the man to let me come here. I said, man, get that instrument out of there. We don't have that. A year later, Ray, who just walked in, folks, he'll take over in a minute, and I were featured. They had a big sign up, Dizzy Gillespie's band, featuring Ray Brown and Milt Jackson. We were the two featured stars in the band. So I went to the same fella and said, hey, homie, I said, you remember a little fella about a year ago that came in with a little set of fives, looked like an iron board, and you told him, no, you can't jam with, boy, we don't have no jamming in here, you know. And I said, I took him out to the front of the club, right? I pointed up to the side. I said, see that? I said, guess what? I said, see that name up there? I said, that's me. But today the 52nd Street, man, fascinating. You know, you had 15 clubs, you know, let's say 8, 9 clubs on each side of the street. And everyone had live music and had a name in it. Billie Holiday, you know, Ella Fitzgerald, you know, all the bands, Coleman Hawkins.
Sure.
You know, we had a Red Eye played in this big band in the same nightclub, 52nd Street.
The Spotlight?
Right.
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 Yeah. Somebody told me that Monk played piano with the band for a while.
Yes, he did. Yeah. John Lewis took his place, as a matter of fact.
That must have been a kick.
Yeah.
It's been quite an experience.
Sure.
Yeah. As Milt Jackson mentioned, we've had another gentleman come into the studio, and we want to thank him for making the trip all the way up here to the Upper West Side of Manhattan when he's working.
This gentleman has been stumbling around here looking for this station for a half hour.
Well, I apologize.
Well, I
for
don't know.
not
I just
getting
didn't
you
know
better
where it was,
directions.
you know.
No, but well, I guess that's my fault, folks. I told him the entrance door was right at 150th Street, right there where my car's parked. I know you could
No,
not
I didn't
miss
see it 'cause
You didn't?
I had a...
Anyway,
It's confusing nonetheless,
he
but
got
Ray
here,
Brown
folks,
is here.
and he'll
and
now
he's
take over.
sitting right across from me. What a pleasure to
Oh,
see
yeah.
you here.
Well, I hate to get here this late, but I know that Jackson has taken care of business because he could spend 2 days telling stories about a lot of things that include the two of us
Yeah.
in the music business, you know,
Yeah.
because we've been together 40 years, you know,
Yeah.
and a lot of things transpired during that time. But it's still a lot of fun to go to work every night.
That's
That's
very
what makes it
obvious.
important.
From anyone that sees you guys perform, I mean, I'm a musician myself, and when you see guys that have been doing it for as long as you have, and the music is still as enthusiastic and still getting to the music as much as you did years ago, that's a real inspiration for younger musicians. And it's a pleasure just to see you two guys sitting here. And I want to ask Ray Brown a couple of the same questions that we're talking to Milt Jackson about, and that's that on the radio station here, this gentleman over here, Greg is producing this Harlem Week, and that will be coming up in 2 weeks. And we were talking about about the ambience in Harlem, what it was like when you first came to town. And I know I read a story where I think it was Hank Jones introduced you to Dizzy on your first
That's right.
night in town, and then from then on, you know, you kind of took the town by storm. Maybe you could tell us about when you first got to Harlem and some of the spots that you remember, and some about the ambience as it's different from what it is today.
Well, you know, the one thing that was different, that's different, I think, all over the world is back in the 30s and 40s, 50s in New York, there was live music everywhere, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, almost every club you could go in had a trio or a quartet or a small group.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, there was music everywhere, you know. You didn't have to go downtown or to the village or, you know, if you went to Brooklyn, there were clubs there. If you went to the Bronx, there were clubs there. You know, uptown, there were clubs everywhere, you know. And that's what I liked about New York as opposed to places like where I came from. I came from Pittsburgh. You know, we had a lot of music in the theaters. We had 2 big theaters, one in the black neighborhood and one downtown, and they always had music every week, a different band. But there wasn't a nightclub you could go to. We had dances, and I wasn't old enough to go to those anyway.
Yeah.
But they had a band come in every week and play a dance.
Somebody told me a story about you being in when the Basie band was at the William Penn.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, that's
Walter
really going
Page
back.
and Joe Jones.
Walter Page, Joe Jones, Freddie Green, and Basie.
Yeah.
I used to go sit under the piano every day after school, listen to the band.
Prez was in the band then, right? Lester Young.
Lester Young.
and,
Sweets Edison was in that band.
Right. Herschel Evans.
Yeah.
That great rhythm section. Walter
That's right.
Page. One of the things I just got to get off my chest, I told it to Milt Jackson, was that you guys are just here for half an hour, 45 minutes, and there's so much I'd like to talk to you about. I'd like to invite you back, first of all, because I'd like to get into depth into all that stuff.
We're probably going to have to do that. I know I'm going to have to do that.
Okay. And you were going to split, Milt?
Yeah. I have to pick up Mickey Roker and get to work.
Okay. You going to stay, Ray?
Well, are we going to be on the air longer?
We've got 20 more minutes.
Okay, sure.
Okay.
All right.
Milt, thanks, Milt. Thank you, Milt Jackson. Milt Jackson is heading out, and we'll continue with Ray.
Okay.
And when I started the interview with Milt, I had put a record on because I wasn't sure exactly what time everybody was going to get here, and it was this great record that you made at a concert with Charlie Parker and Lester Young at Carnegie Hall with Roy Eldridge, and back in 1949.
Whew.
And
that's a while back.
Yeah. And it starts out with this great Lester Young solo, of course, and Milt was just listening to it, and we were talking about Lester and the amazing things he could do. And since I'm a Lester Young fan myself, I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about when you first met him and what he was like as a person and what his music meant to you, if you don't mind.
Well, I met Lester Young maybe a half a dozen occasions before I really met him to know him. You know what I'm saying? A lot of times you're introduced to somebody,
sure,
but you don't know who they are, or they don't know. You don't know them.
I had a drink with you 3 years ago. Same thing. You know what
right.
I mean? You meet someone and you don't remember.
What had happened was when I was in high school, the musicians that were staunch jazz fans had a little club, and of course most bands made records maybe 78 about 3 or 4 times a year. So we would get the records when they came out, and you had 3 days to learn the solos on the record. Had to be able to sing them all the way through. And if you didn't, then we wouldn't let you. You know, if you came to somebody's house, knocked on the door, guy would open the door crack, and then you'd have to sing the latest solo. You know?
Yeah.
Or you'd have to sing maybe the end of Bubble doo boo doo boo doo boo doo ba boo doo boo doo ba boo doo boo doo dee da boo doo doo boo doo 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 ba boo doo dee boo doo 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 doo. You know, from Sometimes I'm Happy or something like that. Yeah. And so anyway, it kept everybody on their toes because every new record that came out, you'd get it, take it home, play it,
sure,
check out all the solos, be able to sing them. You know, this was a departure for me because being a bass player, I was more interested in what the bass player was playing than the solos, but it was good training for me to learn to sing the solos, because now I can sing. Most of the old records you go back to, you know, Ellington, Basie, even Tommy Dorsey and Goodman and Charlie Barnett, I can sing the solos off the record, you know.
Yeah.
I remember a lot of them. Erskine Hawkins, you know.
Sure.
Benny Carter, Fats Waller, so many, you know.
Sure. So you actually met Prez back then, but just in the
I met him many times. But when I joined Jazz at the Philharmonic, is when I finally really got to be around him steadily, you know.
Yeah.
And you know, he fascinated us in several ways. His manner of speech was as unique as his playing. And you had to hear it. I mean, I don't guess there's too much of it on tape, but it would be lovely to hear the way he would say it, you know.
I guess, you know, there's 2 interviews with him, and one's pretty long, where he does stretch out. I interviewed John Lewis, and he was talking about how Prez was, he said, he was a poet when he played, and also a kind of a poet when he talked.
That's right.
Too. He really was a poet.
Oh yeah. I mean, he's responsible for so many things that we have now, you know.
Yeah.
If you're standing around and you think something's amiss, we say, I think I feel a draft, you know. Well, he started that back in the 40s, you know.
Sure.
All kinds of little things like that, you know.
What did his music mean to you, and then what he was playing on the tenor?
Well, I had been singing it for years when I met him, you know, so it wasn't new to me, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, we knew we had Taxi War Dance and Easy Does It, all of those things, you know.
Tickle Toe. And
yeah. So, you know, I mean, he was already a legend to us when I met him, you know.
Sure. Hanging around the Basie band, hearing those records, you got an earful of Walter Page, I guess.
Oh, yeah. Well, I got an earful of everybody, you know.
Sure.
I mean, luckily, everybody in the Basie band is or was a very close friend of mine, you know. Mm-hmm. I mean, people like Sweets Edison and Buck Clayton and I'm talking about the old Basie band and the new Basie bands. I mean, I know everybody in this new band practically.
Earl
Warren. Yeah, we played golf in California. He came through from Europe about 3 weeks ago. Came to San Francisco for a couple of days, then came to L.A. And he and I and Sweets and another guy played golf. And we had a great time. And we were talking about the old days and having a good time.
Yeah.
So my association with all the guys in the band has run from way back there. That was 36 when they were at the hotel in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And that's really a long time ago.
Yeah, sure is. Almost 50 years ago.
That's right.
I don't believe it looking at you, but you say you were there, so I'll take your word for it.
No question.
Yeah. Before we get back to talking about Harlem and a few other things you did, including, I guess, one of the real highlights, I mean, I guess you're one of the, if not the most recorded bassist in jazz history. I guess you hear that quite often, probably. And you made, I would assume, one of your favorite greatest records would be the duos with Duke. I mean, that's probably
I enjoy
a real stand-up. But I'd like to ask you about that and a few other things. But just like to get you to talk about just a couple of all those great bass players, and there were many great bass players, Walter Page and John Kirby and Billy Taylor and so. Who were some of your favorites back in those days before Blanton turned it around? And like, what did someone like Walter Page mean to you? What did he offer to you? Was it the great feel he had?
Yeah, well, you see, prior to Blanton opening it up, the bass was a means of rhythm movement,
Right.
It was more feel than even sound, because Page came from the old school of slap bass, So you played the bass, but you played it in a way that the strings slapped up against the board.
Right.
And when you played it like that, you could hear it a block away, which was necessary because there were no microphones and no amplifiers. I mean, Page used to stand in the back of that band. They used to have one microphone Helen Hume sang out of, or a guy would come down and play solos, in the front of the band. But you could hear him all the way in the back of the dance hall,
Yeah.
So, and he was a big guy anyway,
Big Un. They call him, I think.
Big Un, yeah. That's name's Philly Joe Jones laid that name on Oscar Peterson years ago when we used to run around together. He used to call Oscar Peterson Big Un. So that name's been moved around a bit.
Right.
But anyway, Kirby and Walter Page. There was a guy I used to play with, a guy I used to like hear sing named Gene Austin. Gene Austin had a bass player named Candy.
Candy, yeah.
Yeah, and he played that same way, very good,
Yeah.
So, that was the style in those days.
Right.
And I was very impressed with it. Wellman Broger played with Ellington, another guy,
Sure.
And then Pettiford sort of turned that whole thing around. I mean, not Pettiford, but Blanton seemed to turn that whole thing around, see.
Right.
He took the slap out of it and just got a straight, beautiful sound, no more slap. And started adding a few extra notes and extended the range.
Sure.
He had studied it, and he was playing, upper and down and mixing it up, and made it very interesting.
Yeah. I also thought he was, all those great lines he was playing, as opposed to just, rooting fifth all the time. And
That's
all that
right.
kind
Yeah.
of stuff.
So I'm saying,
Right.
even though I remember the guys before Blanton, that's where the big, because I came right in the middle of that.
Yes, you did.
I mean, when I started taking up the bass was when Blanton had just started making those solos. And every guy's house you'd go to that had a bass would have those on his record player. So you heard them everywhere you went.
Did you see Blanton in person?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Well, what was he like?
Well, I didn't meet him. I just saw him
Just
in the
saw
theater, yeah.
Yeah. Was he playing without an amp, too? I assume
yeah.
the amps came.
39 and 40? Oh, yes.
How about when you first played in Dizzy's band? No amp
No
either.
amp, that's right.
When did the amp come in?
Well,
for you and for most bassists.
Just in I got a amp with a coil in it that used to predictably go out sometime during the night, I mean, you'd be going boom, 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 and you'd disappear,
Yeah.
And it wasn't really great reproduction either. It was just a microphone.
We had Eddie Durham up here not too long ago, and he was telling a story about I think he was one of the first electric guitar
That's
players.
right.
And he was talking about the Benny Moten band even before Lunsford's band. And he said he'd go out with this amplifier made with hangers and everything, and he'd be playing a solo, and all of a sudden the police report would come in over the speaker during the tour.
That's right.
It was very unreliable in those days.
Oh yeah, that used to happen a lot. Sure,
Yeah,
you get all kind of calls.
Yeah, yeah. We're talking here with Ray Brown. I can't tell you it was a thrill just to be sitting across from this guy, and don't have to introduce Ray Brown to a jazz audience. The big deal is that he's playing with Milt Jackson, Cedar Walton, and Mickey Roker down at the Blue Note, 131 West 3rd Street, and they'll be there through Sunday evening. I know in recent years you've been involved in many different aspects. Like the first time I met you was you were backstage at the Kennedy Center when the MJQ was appearing there just a few years ago in the role of road manager, or manager anyway, if not road manager. When did that start? When did you start investigating the other parts of the business outside of just playing the bass so wonderfully?
Oh, that started quite a few years ago, maybe
50s,
15, 20
60s?
years ago. Yeah, in the 50s. I think I always had a penchant for business. And consequently, most of the bands that I worked in, somewhere along the line, I'd wind up taking care of the money and paying everybody, and turning in the reports, I did it with Oscar Peterson. I was with him for 15 years, So, just became a way of life,
Sure.
And I don't know how it ever happened. I don't know whether I asked for it or somebody asked me to do it, but, you seem to wind up in your spot sooner or later. We all do,
Yeah. Just wound up gravitating towards those responsibilities. I guess, you're a team player. I guess being a bass player, you're a team player.
That's right.
Yeah. You mentioned before those great records you made on the Pablo label, and we should mention that I guess one of your most recent albums is this record with Milt Jackson called Soul Root on Pablo.
Oh, yeah.
And that's Pablo number 2310900, in case you're interested in picking it up. But you made so many records for Norman Granz, hundreds, probably thousands. And it'll be a task for someone someday to figure out exactly what you did. They'll probably have to go borrow, if you kept a notebook maybe.
No.
You didn't? Oh, well,
no.
Forget it then. That's going to be impossible.
No, but the problem is, if I ever tried to get a record of everything I ever recorded with everybody, I'd have to go in so many directions.
Right.
I'd have to all the movie tracks. Forget the jazz records. I'm talking about the other stuff, pop records.
Sure.
I used to make all those records. What's the girl who you got the dog in the window?
Oh, Teresa Brewer?
No.
No. Patty Page?
Patty Page. Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to do all that stuff with Mitch Miller.
Sure.
Some of the stuff with Mule, Frankie Lane. And that's, going back all the way up to recently. This is a funny story I tell sometimes. I guess about 2 years ago, I got a call to go in and do a record date. And I got there with my bass, and there was nobody there except 3 or 4 people standing in the studio. And I walked in, and I said, what's going on? The guy said, just unpack and tune up, and we'll be with you in a minute. So I went in the studio and started tuning up. And, there was some earphones, and there was a sheet of music paper and a pencil and a music stand and a microphone. So the guy says, we don't have music for you. We just play the track, and you make up your own part, And it was just for one tune on the album. And they paid me very well for it. But it was a group called Blondie. Now, I hate to admit this, but I didn't know anything about this group, even though they were a big selling group. They had gold and platinum records all the time.
Right.
So anyway, I did this track, and there's a gas station I should go to by my house. And there's a bunch of young kids working in there. Some of them are musicians. And I'd go in there and I'd get my gas. Sometimes I had the bass laying in the back of the car. And they never paid me any attention. Get my gas and go. I made this record with Blondie, and about 6 weeks after it came out, it was #1 on all the charts. even in England and a couple other places. And I go to the gas station, and the guy takes my card, he looks at it, he says, Ray Brown. He says, are you the Ray Brown on the Blondie record?
You made it.
And then they're all crowded around me, you know, so.
Bringing music to all different kinds of
Yeah,
generations.
so, you know, if I had to look up all the records I made, I'd have to go on.
Oh.
I made records with people called The Doors.
Oh, really? With
Yeah,
the Doors?
Yeah.
Jeez.
Well, all kinds of stuff, so.
Well,
I'd have to go a lot of ways to find all the records I made.
But would you agree that that of all those thousands of sides, that duo session with Duke was probably one of the
highlights? Oh, yeah. Well, unquestionably. I've been waiting for that all my life.
It was called This One's for Blanton, and there was such an amazing rapport between the two of you on that session. Was it just pretty much a matter of you both meeting at the studio and making the record? Because I know that your schedule and his schedule were so crazy you probably didn't get together before.
Well, this was the last record he made before he died. And he was sick then.
He was sick.
We did the second half of that album. He had a fever, you know.
Did they videotape that stuff?
No, they videotaped a quartet thing we did.
Right,
about a year before that with Joe Pass and I and Louis Bellson.
Right. But the duos ones weren't.
No, we did one track. We did one side in Los Angeles, and we did another one in Vegas. He was working in Vegas, and I flew up there, and we finished the album up there.
When did you first actually play with Duke? Was that the very first time? Or you must have been on the road together, or did you ever sub in the band or do anything?
No, but we messed around a few times in a theater sometimes. When I was married to Ella Fitzgerald, they used to be together on a lot of, at the Paramount Theater here for years. They, you know, and at Apollo Theater. So I would mess around a lot, but I had never really played in his band or spent any time playing with him.
Yeah.
And I had to research all those old Blanton records to go over those bass parts, and I don't know how he remembered that stuff.
Yeah.
You know, because he hadn't played that in years, you know.
Yeah. Well, it's called This One's for Blanton, and I'm sure everyone has it already. One of the real classic jazz records. With our guest, Ray Brown, we've got less than 4 minutes to go, and again, I want to repeat what I said before. I do hope that you can come here again before you leave town or next time you come to town and spend 3 hours with me, and because I've got a lot of stuff I want to talk to you about that we didn't even get to tonight.
We'll go back. I'll talk to Jackson. We'll set something up and come back.
Okay, that would be great. And I know there's a gentleman here who wants to talk to you about Harlem Week, and maybe we'll get a chance to do that at the next